It's time to spring into style. Blossom this season with H&M's latest Spring-Summer 2024 collection. Elevate your look and shop now at hm.com or visit us in-store today.
The City of Portland's Bureau of Development Services estimates our city has more than 1,600 unreinforced masonry buildings. Now, these buildings pose a high risk of collapsing during a major earthquake. And after quakes in Taiwan and New Jersey entered the headlines, experts are reminding anyone who will listen that Portland is not ready for the big one. The big one, scientists say, that we're long overdue for. A quake big enough to bring down most of our bridges and cut off services like electricity and water for weeks. So today on CityCast Portland, we're revisiting a conversation we had with science journalist Erin Ross. She's giving us updates on the latest Cascadia earthquake predictions, and we'll also be sharing tips on how to keep you and your family safe. It's Wednesday, April 10th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. The reason you're here, Erin, is that we did a segment about how the Burnside Bridge was getting basically torn down and rebuilt in the next 5 years because it's not earthquake ready. And it is like one of the most, central bridges. It connects services to places not even immediately around it because it's like an overpass for not only a freeway, but a train line and all these things.
It's central. The other ones that are done are like at the far north or south end or wherever.
Exactly. And when we covered that, I went ahead and did a little bit more research of stuff that I think we all kind of know, but don't want to face because it's so scary. So let's talk about it. What kind of damage would the big one cause here in Portland? I mean, aside from, as we already noted, that pretty much almost all of the bridges will either completely collapse or they will be rendered useless, except for, like Tillicum Crossing. And I believe the Selwood is they're all rated as like, they're going to be okay, we think,
Yeah, like they might have to do like a little bit of repairs to the on-ramps for those. Tillicum Crossing should be open like almost immediately after an earthquake. Selwood Bridge is going to take like a few days to a week later. But then, and it's like Sauvie Island's in good shape. And then Fremont and Glen Jackson will probably need to have the approaches replaced. So like that might be like more of like a month to 2 month scale. And then like, the rest are gone. They're just gone.
Yeah.
But of course, it's not just bridges. Portland is in pretty rough shape in terms of just like infrastructure in general for earthquake prep. Like one study from 2018 estimated that a magnitude 9 Cascadia quake would cause over $36 billion in damages in Portland, depending on the time of year that the quake strikes, and up to 27,000 casualties, which, like, keeping in mind that casualties is not just deaths, it's also like minor injuries and hospitalizations, but still like 27,000 people requiring medical treatment. And that's because we just have a ton of these unreinforced masonry buildings that are really likely to collapse. And that's like old brick buildings, but also concrete buildings. And that includes schools and apartments. And there's been like pushes to try and put in new regulations that would require these buildings to be updated. But the like landlord associations and business associations keep on shutting those down. But like a lot of places where people live, especially lower income people, are going to be in a lot of trouble. And then the other really big area that people are concerned about is the natural gas storage that we have here.
Yeah, I know about that place because I can smell it from my house sometimes, since it's like right above the St. John's Bridge.
Yeah, when I was looking for houses, I was looking at houses in Germantown, and I went to this condo and looked out and saw these natural gas tanks and went, nope, I'm not living there, because when the earthquake comes, those are all on what's called like alluvial soil. They're basically built on like infill marshland. And that type of soil, when there's an earthquake, becomes really bouncy. It's like a trampoline. And it does this thing called liquefaction, where like the solid ground starts behaving like liquid instead of like a solid. And they're expecting like at minimum major gas leaks, but I mean, that could also just be a giant explosion. It's a major environmental disaster that could have like long-term multi-year health consequences that's waiting to happen.
Yeah. Well, I was told by someone who got really into earthquake preparedness, they're just like, when the big one happens, they're basically like, you don't want to be near any of the industrial areas because we just don't know what's going on there. And you also don't want to be downtown because of all the unreinforced masonry. They're like, all of downtown's just going to fall and it's going to kill anyone who's walking around there. And I was just like, oh, so scary.
Yeah, it's terrifying. And it's not necessary exactly. Like even our newer building codes aren't quite up to like snuff with like California's and San Francisco's, but they're still a big improvement on where they were like pre-1990. But yeah, these are preventable things, but they take money, and that's a lot of investment that necessarily like the city doesn't want to make or the state doesn't want to make.
Yeah, especially because I'm sure part of them's like, but it couldn't happen. And it's just like, yeah, we should probably be putting all our eggs in the it could happen basket, though. Because like,
yeah, because
it could happen.
It could happen. And a Cascadia earthquake, like when we talk about things that could happen in probability, this is a 37% estimated chance of a magnitude 7 or higher over the next 50 years. Those aren't odds that I'd want to bet against. Those are pretty high odds of at least from there's like some earthquake coming up.
Yeah. Well, we always hear about the Cascadia earthquake, but we might get just a bunch of smaller earthquakes. Should we be worried about those too? Or do you think if they're below 7, we're like, good, like we don't have to worry about it?
So proximity is a really big deal when it comes to earthquake damage. Like the closer to it you are, the worse it'll be. So Portland actually has a ton of small faults. And thankfully, none of them are super active, like other than like the 1993 Scotts Mills one, which was, I think, a magnitude 5.3. We haven't had a major earthquake locally in a while, but we have a lot of faults that are very capable of producing major earthquakes. And the same study that looked at the damages from the Cascadia quake also estimated the damages for a magnitude 6.8 earthquake along the Portland Hills Fault, which is not very likely to rupture, but they found that 6.8 earthquake would have twice the damages and like twice the casualties in Portland than a magnitude 9 on the Cascadia quake. And like keeping in mind that like going from like a magnitude 6.8 or like a 7 to a 9 is a bigger jump than it seems like, because it's a logarithmic scale.
Yeah.
So like each time you go up a number, it's times 10. So this is, despite the fact that a Cascadia earthquake would be 100 times bigger and much worse for the state as a whole, or 100 times more powerful, a local earthquake could cause significantly more damage because it'll be right underneath us. In terms of how worried about that to be, it's kind of a weird risk because, first of all, like this is just kind of a big unknown. Like we don't study a lot of these faults very well. The ones that we do study, they rupture pretty rarely, like on the scale of a few thousand years. But then you add in the fact that there are like dozens of these, and suddenly it becomes a much bigger risk. And the risk, again, like we just don't really know a lot about it. But each time we look at a fault, we're like, oh, it looks like it's more likely to rupture than we thought it was. So there's like a big one, the Gale Creek Fault over by like the Scoggins Dam. You can actually see that one where they excavated the dam. If you look at like just the bank and the cutaway, you can see where the fault line is, and they've been able to see it moving. And these are all moving like, you know, a millimeter a year. They're like pretty solidly active faults. So.
Yeah. I mean, I heard the reason our city and this area is so far behind in preparing for the big one is because they didn't even know the fault existed until like maybe 50 years ago. And then like it wasn't until like a few more years after, or like maybe 30, I don't know, where they're just like, oh, and it's active.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that true? Like, that's kind of messed up.
Well, we didn't even know that plate tectonics was a thing until the 70s. Like, we didn't understand where earthquakes came from.
Oh my God,
we
really?
had all of these big shifting things. Yeah, this is honestly pretty new science.
Whoa.
When they found plate tectonics, they were like, we've solved it. We'll be able to predict earthquakes for forever. And like, we still can't. We just guess. It's only best guesses. But yeah, we didn't know about the Cascadia earthquake until, you know, like, well, we didn't know that it could be like pretty regular until the early 90s, until like Chris Goldfinger and a few other scientists at Oregon State started investigating these like ghost forests that were dead because of saltwater intrusion caused by a tsunami. And then they're like, well, where'd the tsunami come from? Oh, crap. It's like they found that people in Japan had written records of this tsunami without an earthquake. Where did it come from? It came from us. And so, yeah, it's been kind of a story of like just increasing knowledge of this being worse.
Yeah. All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, what to do to stay safe during the big one and what to prep. Okay, Aaron, so everything's coming down. Let's say you're stuck downtown or your house or you live in an apartment building. Like, what should you do while it's happening?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's such an important question. Especially because I think there's kind of some misunderstandings. We've all been taught like hide underneath the table. Not necessarily. If the table's not sturdy, square things, when things fall on them, they go flat. I mean, it's better than nothing. Like, if you're outside and your concern is small debris falling on you, then it's like duck and cover your head, get up close to a tree, don't get next to a wall unless it's like an archway, get under arches, benches, because you just want to have like some protection against like head injuries is what you're thinking about in that situation. If you're driving your car, pull over, turn it off, put your emergency brake on. I'm not sure why that helps, but every resource I've ever seen is like, don't forget your e-brake, and they put that in bold. So don't forget your e-brake. If you're at home, again, sturdy tables next to but not under your bed. If you are in bed, roll over. Just put it over your head. Like, don't try and get out of bed. You're not going to be able to walk. You're crawling in this situation. But again, you don't want to be underneath anything that's like flimsy or fragile. Buy a really nice like antique oak table or something if you want to have something to hide under.
There's a perfect excuse for that. Yeah.
Yes.
And if you're just out in the street, because like I feel like a big rush comes over you. I mean, I've been in earthquakes and you just want to run out. Like you want to run out of wherever you're at.
Right.
Is that a good instinct to have? Or you're just like, nah, maybe you shouldn't run out?
It really depends on where you are. And again, like in a serious earthquake, you're not running anywhere. Like you're not going to be able to stand up. We're talking like massive rolling waves, unless you're lucky enough to be on like bedrock, in which case your shaking will be pretty minimal. So it's basically like just get yourself as small as you can, tiny ball, hands over your head.
Okay.
And if you can move somewhere safely, do so, but don't count on two legs making it happen, and you want to be on all fours.
Oh, okay. So doorways, no longer a good thing.
The reason that everybody thinks about doorways, this is actually like kind of why regional advice matters. It's a lot more applicable to places like Southern California where you have a lot of stucco buildings. So the whole doorway legend came from the fact that they'd be the only wooden things in these masonry houses. So when the masonry houses crumble, the doors are still standing and people are like, wow, doors are super strong. But really, like, exterior walls are going to be your strongest and like least likely to fall.
Okay. This is good to know. I've already identified all of them at my house. This is great.
Yeah.
Definitely not going underneath any IKEA furniture, that's for sure.
No.
Okay. So now the shaking has stopped. What do you do now?
That's when you get outside.
That's all right. And you look for like live wires and like stuff like that.
Yeah, you look for live wires. You want to get away from any fires. This is why you want to do things like participate in the Great Shakeout, because you're not going to be thinking clearly. You're not going to be like, okay, like here's my checklist of things to do. Just like in a fire, you practice fire drills that when you panic, you do the right thing. So I would really recommend participating in your local shakeouts. It's every year in October. It's basically a statewide earthquake drill. Everybody stops and drops and covers. If you're at the coast, you're supposed to run for high ground. It's when they do a lot of the practice for emergency trainings, like taking your bike to go and get supplies for your local neighborhood. Like, what are the safe bike routes that are expected to not get damaged to get around where you are?
Yeah. Another thing I heard that city services are predicted to shut down, but I'm not sure for how long. If it was the Cascadia, how long would that be?
The general rule is like 2 weeks for prep. But to be honest, that doesn't necessarily mean that city services are back up and running in 2 weeks. That means that's how long they expect it to take for like disaster aid to arrive. We're not just talking about like getting the municipal government up and running or getting emergency services up and running or bridges, which like power lines are really complicated things, as we all know from any PGE outage. Sewers are going to be down, water pipes and infrastructure are going to be down. So there's like 2 weeks is how long you want to be individually prepared for so that you can get other resources when they're available to you.
Yeah. But I mean, if we all know how government works, we should probably be prepared for longer than 2 weeks, is what I'm hearing.
Being prepared for like your own life for longer than 2 weeks. But like in terms of what you keep on hand, like you don't need more than 2 weeks of water, because even if you don't have running water again, there will be like ways to get water set up by that point. Like that's about how long they expect for like the Army Corps of Engineers to get up and running and like FEMA to show up.
Yeah. I don't know. After Katrina, I don't trust anyone. Seriously.
I mean, after the fires in Oregon in 2020.
Yeah.
FEMA actually does do some pretty impressive work, but there's also like a lot of nothing is perfect and it's far from perfect.
Right. Well, it seems that we are going to have to prepare ourselves. I mean, the city is, of course, obviously doing stuff. I mean, the Burnside Bridge project is an example. But is there anything before we go into like the nitty gritty of like what we should pack in our earthquake preparedness kit? Like, what can we do to make sure that our house just doesn't slide into the Willamette River or completely collapse?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, like most houses in Portland, unlike apartment buildings, are built out of wood. And that is great news in an earthquake because wood is bendy, so it doesn't tend to break. So there's a very good chance that most of our houses will still be standing. But you're right, like one big issue is shaking off the foundation. So there are companies that will come and, check out the Better Business Bureau before hiring any company. I'm not going to like endorse any on here, but some are quite sketchy. But there are companies that can come in and they'll like help you remediate your house and help you stabilize it and get it up to code. But also a lot of it is stuff you can do on your own as long as you like look up the way to do it correctly. So one big thing is bolting your house to the foundations. If your house is on the foundations, it's not going anywhere, but most houses aren't. There are correct bolts to do that and wrong bolts. Like don't use the ones that you use to stop your roof from flying off, because those ones are for up and down motion. This is side to side. You want to get like the right bolts, but you can install those yourself. You can also make sure that your porch is bolted to the foundation, because porches are usually attached to the walls of houses and can pull the wall away if it falls separately.
Ooh.
If you have any gas appliances, you want to make sure that it is bolted to the wall correctly. And there are like special bands you can buy. This is also something you can do yourself. And those like 3 things will solve a lot of problems. Places built after 1990 are probably fine.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to keep in mind if you have newer construction.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us, though, have homes that are over 100 years old.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, you're still struggling just to like keep it up as is and throw in an earthquake and you're like, God dang it.
Yeah. I told myself, like, I was really thinking about the earthquakes when I was buying my home. So I like ruled out Germantown because of the giant fireball. And I was like, I'm going to get somewhere built after 1996. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm in a 1921 home. I love it. It's going to fall down the hill.
Oh, no.
No.
Sorry, I'm just laughing because I also have a 1920. I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to go straight to the river.
All you can do is laugh about it.
So that's actually good. I didn't know that we could bolt our houses ourselves. I always thought you had to hire someone and stuff. So so I can YouTube this stuff. This is going to be great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what kinds of things we should pack in our 2-week emergency go bag.
There's, the basics, like having water, having enough food. And that's when we talk about enough food, you want a gallon per water per person per day. So that's a lot of water that you are storing somewhere in your house. And also know that like these like non-perishable foods and water do go bad. So you kind of want to cycle them out eventually, like every few years, unless you want to have water that tastes like nasty plastic. I mean, I guess not the end of the world, better than no water at all or sewer water. And then foods, first aid kits, but you also want to have things like batteries and an emergency radio. Also having a go bag, I would really recommend that, so that when you go to a shelter, you have everything that you need. You don't need to, like, if your house is destroyed, try and find stuff. You just need to find the bag. I would also put any important documents, and this is just kind of a good life lesson, in a fireproof safe. Not to stop it from being stolen, but it stops it from burning. And then also you know exactly where it is in the event that you need to relocate to a shelter. You can take those documents and put them somewhere.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I also heard to not put your to-go bag or whatever, or your emergency stash in the basement.
Right.
Where should we put it then?
Put it in your garage if you have one. An outside shed is a really good place if you have a space with outdoors. I mean, if you have nowhere else, basement is fine. But like keeping in mind that, things fall down, right? But yeah, I have a shed for my emergency stash. I keep it in the backyard.
An emergency shed. Cool.
Yes.
Something also that I heard is that along with the food is to also just like pack things that you think will make you feel better in a really stressful situation, which I feel like most emergency kits don't have.
Yeah.
What would be in your like, Erin, the world is ending. My world is ending, but I have a Snickers bar. Like, what would you put in your bag?
I know exactly what it would be, and it's funny because it's about the end of the world. But I used to carry the book Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett like around with me, because if I was anywhere I traveled, if I was having a bad day when I was in high school, I could just like open it up and read a new page, and it would make me giggle. So sometimes when I'm having like a really bad day, I can just like grab a random page and read a chapter, and it makes me happy. So I don't think it would be food, even though I'm big on having lots of chocolates and things like that in your preparedness kits. I think that would be like the thing that I would bring, my unexpected comfort item.
Yeah.
One last important thing. When you're making your emergency kit, don't forget your pets.
Yeah. When we did ours, we actually even thought of the neighbors we really liked next to us because they were younger than us, and we're like, they're not going to have beans. We'll get enough beans for them. Like, we're just like, they didn't plan, and we're just like, those crazy kids.
That's like the most Portland solution, though, for anything. It's like, do you really need disaster prep? No, like, my neighborhood lesbians have got me.
It's true.
It is true, though.
Gather around the Subaru, kids. I'm handing out beans to everyone.
It's like, what are you going to do if something goes wrong? Like, Aaron, I'm just going to come find you.
Exactly. All right, Aaron. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and we appreciate all this useful info.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I look forward to next time.
And a quick correction to this interview. At one point, Erin misspoke and said to look for exterior walls. What she meant was to look for interior walls, as those are your friend during an earthquake. Thanks to the listener who pointed that out and passed along the Oregon Office of Emergency Management's Living on Shaky Ground. That handbook has a ton more information about how to get through an earthquake in Oregon, and we've got it linked in the show notes if you want to check it out. Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.